Hello friends, here I am again with Granny's GodPod number 62, this time discussing how the Old Testament creation account might have been influenced by ancient Near Eastern sources. But before we start, can I ask you to please like the GodPod? The more likes I get, the more YouTube will share it to others. Let's get into it. I've recently been looking at a big fat book by the father and son McDowells called Evidence That Demands a Verdict. From an apologetic standpoint, I was looking for material on the similarities and differences between Old Testament and ancient Near Eastern writings on creation. I shall now use the abbreviated terms of OT for the Old Testament and ANE for the ancient Near East. Since no man was there right at the beginning, all accounts surely must be written by writers trying to understand the natural order of how and why mankind came to exist, whether by divine inspiration or by human perception. Finding creation and flood accounts in other cultures in the late 19th century led to the question of whether the writers of the OT had borrowed from pagan myths and how that might impact on our understanding of the Bible account. The parallels between Egyptian sources and biblical creation accounts are remarkably similar in some respects, but we should expect this since Israel did have a history in Egypt. While biblical writers might well be influenced by common thought forms and stories from the ANE culture, we should look for distinctions between Hebrew thought and ANE beliefs and practices. The ANE gives the Bible its historical, geographical and cultural context, but the OT worldview is unique in the ANE in its commitment to monotheism. While the structure of creation accounts may be ordered similarly, there are differences. Right from the start, the Genesis account says, "In the beginning, God created the heaven and earth." That is, before the beginning there was nothing except God, whereas in both Egyptian and Mesopotamian accounts, creation came from cosmic particles that existed before the gods themselves. The writers seem to have different opinions of their subjects too. The Genesis God receives respect and has a steadfast character, whereas the gods of the ANE are described with petty characteristics and waywardness. In this respect, the little g gods were in the image of man with human characteristics, while in Genesis, man is made in the image of God and looks up to God's character. In the ANE literature, the lesser gods were fed up with their toil and asked their ruler for creatures to do their work. The Genesis God gave mankind dominion over all creation, whereas in Mesopotamian myths, man was created to provide the gods with food and adulation. There are many parallels between the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation account, and the biblical creation account. The creation of the firmament or heavens, dry land, heavenly bodies, and man are the same, and after it is done, the gods of the Enuma Elish rest and celebrate, while in the OT God rests and sanctifies the seventh day. In Genesis, the divine spirit creates cosmic matter and exists independently of it, while the gods of the Enuma Elish are coexistent in the midst of it all. The Enuma Elish is a hymn commemorating Marduk's elevation to the head of the pantheon after he defeats Tiamat in a rebellion against the gods. Marduk lays out the cosmos using Tiamat's corpse. In A&E accounts, when humankind multiplied, death was a fate to keep the population in check. The ruler organised his subjects to provide the gods with whatever they desired, to justify the continuation of human existence. This included the regular care and maintenance of the local temples, and revolved around the god's image, a vessel that was not thought to be the god itself, but a vessel in which the deity could manifest their presence. The image would be woken, washed, clothed, and presented with 2 lavish meals daily, piled outside the sanctuary. The people never knew if their service was satisfactory, and at any time they could be punished with hardship, disease, or an early death. So what, I wonder, did they think when the deity did not consume the banquet they provided? The leftover offerings were divided among the priests as part of their wages. But left over from what? And if the banquet was not fully consumed by the deity, was he or she thought to be displeased, or just not hungry? I've not been able to find answers to this. We are told in the OT that the priests could consume the animal sacrifices made on the altar in the tabernacle. While God is said to be pleased with the pleasant aroma of Noah's sacrifice, he is not expected to consume it himself. The purpose of these sacrifices was either to seek atonement of sins, or, in Noah's case, to give thanks for safe deliverance. It would be quite normal to use figures of speech from the surrounding cultures and literature, especially since the OT was written not solely for Jews but for the Gentiles as well. But the Bible account is filled with radically new meaning. The OT's strictly monotheistic ideas are not found in any A&E writings. So while the OT writers were probably influenced by their position amid A&E cultures, they obviously were not influenced by their religious practices that we now see as pagan. In fact, the God of the OT specifically says we are not to worship any other god but he, nor to make idols. And it may be that one of the purposes of the strict methods of sacrifices and feasts given to Israel was to differentiate them from pagan practices. I'll leave you with my question. What do you think people thought when the little g gods didn't eat their lavish meals? Was it like the man with his church collection, who supposedly said, "I throw my money up into the air, and what God wants he takes. What comes down is for me"? Thanks for listening. See you next time.